Today we're going to talk about creative technologies for game-changing business ideas. Now, I have some experience with enterprise and local engagement with both third sector companies and businesses, but the people we have speaking here today are megastars in terms of working with business and the community. We've got Professor Rachel Granger from our business school, who specialises in working with the creative economy. We've got Tracy Harwood from the Institute of Creative Technologies. And lastly, we have Daniela Romano, Professor of Creative AI. So artificial intelligence, we all know, is up and coming. Tracy has just prefaced that with her Art AI Festival. But we've got lots of inventive stuff coming up, like artificially intelligent advertising. But Daniela is going to talk about some projects to do with health and well-being and creative AI. So I'm really looking forward to speaking to all of you. I'm sure Rachel, Tracy, and Daniela will all give you many different ideas about how you could apply these creative technologies to your business. I think the common thread between all of us is that we are very engaged with business. We advocate for local connection, local enterprise, and thinking about new ways of working between higher education institutions and local businesses. I wanted to preface this chat with just a little bit of an introduction from me before we go to Rachel, talking about my experiences, particularly with civic engagement and then subsequently local enterprise. And for me, it all started when I used to work at the University of East London, and UEL used to position itself as London's leading civic engagement university. So coming from a background of media, I used to think to myself, what does this mean in terms of the creative subjects? Some other subjects, like social sciences, you can see them being more civically or socially engaged than others. So I used to take the advertising and media students out to local organizations, and I used to conduct a module called Pitching for Business. And they would get a sense of what the charity or third sector organization was like. We would volunteer there. And then we would typically work on a live brief together, responding to the needs of that charity. Typically, it would be a social media campaign or some kind of digital campaign. And through the years, as I kept on doing this, I wanted to make it bigger. So I created a kind of in-house agency called Creative Wave, which the tagline was a local agency for local enterprise. And I wanted to work exclusively with third sector companies or with startup businesses in the local area, also giving them the kind of voice of Gen Z and their take on things. So even if they wanted, a fresh take on their communications, they could come to us and get some input. We did a lot of focus groups with Newham Council, which is one of the boroughs in East London, especially when they would have a new campaign targeted at 16 to 24-year-olds for feedback. So there were various projects. We tried to rebrand volunteering itself in the East London area, which the students came up with this thing about urbanist. Whatever your skills are, you can use them to contribute to your local area. But naturally, that seemed to start working with lots of different businesses. So I worked with the London Youth Advisory Board, Royal Greenwich Heritage Trust, socially conscious organisations like Cause to Create and Creative Conscience. But then as well, we were working very intensively with our enterprise department. So they've housed a lot of startups like Vidicrew and Speedfreak that you see here. So it kind of slowly transitioned for me from civic engagement to enterprise. But really for me, it's always been about the impact that the academics and the students can provide for business and for their community. Going further, this led to kind of international projects, and this is the British Council's Creative Spark project, which was based in Central Asia. And we worked with students in Kazakhstan to try and invigorate the creative economy, because in Kazakhstan, the main kind of sources of income really come from mining, and the creative economy doesn't exist there. So this was about working with students to give them ideas for how they could do their own creative businesses. So for me, I've always been very, very grassroots, very local, very entrepreneurial in my approach to enterprise, and trying to be helpful and resourceful for the community. So through my interest, and just talking about my interest at De Montfort, I joined De Montfort in August. I met Rachel Granger, who has done a lot of work in Leicester and Leicestershire around creative enterprise in particular, and the creative economy. So Rachel, I just wondered if you wanted to introduce yourself and a bit about the research that you're doing, particularly into Leicestershire and the local creative economy.
Okay, thanks for that, Alan. And welcome everybody. My name's Rachel Granger. I'm a professor of urban economies, but much of my research is very much based on the creative industries and cultural and creative sectors. So it's absolutely fantastic to be here today. And actually, rather than talk too much about the research, I think I really want to talk about innovation, because that's why we're here. And actually what you've said, Alan, provides some really interesting context to the week itself. And I think also this event that's been led by De Montfort University. Leicester's Innovation Week kicked off yesterday. You probably saw it with the First Steps to Business blast off. Really exciting sort of piece centering on the space park in Leicester and considering ways in which growth might emerge from commercial engagement. In the afternoon, for those that were able to catch it, there was a lot of discussion about next generation diagnostics in the health sector. Both sessions absolutely incredible, and they rightly highlighted the scientific expertise in our local economy that comes from, in those cases, space and health, and which hopefully could lead to economic growth, and that's why we're all here. We might refer to those, and people that know me know that I talk about this a lot, this distinction. We might refer to those as the Sti approach to innovation, their science, their technology, and the investment in it, and that is all fantastic. In this session, however, I think we're going to look more generally at the power of the creative technologies as another area of considerable expertise in Leicester's economy, and arguably one with a wider innovation capture and potential. And I say that because in creative technologies, you have the science and technology and the investment, of course, but you've also got the doing, the using, the interacting as one of the most powerful precursors to innovation. In other words, creative technologies are one of the few areas of our local economy that brings together both the science and technology and the social interaction. And using both of those can be absolutely powerful in driving innovation, both as products and services. In other words, the two types of innovation processes. And of course, I don't want to steal the limelight. We have two incredible researchers here today, and plus other experts that are going to talk about their own area of creative technology. And it's probably worth just defining what we mean here by creative technologies. We're talking about the technology-focused professionals who understand the creative process, are really good at prototyping early, facilitating prototype testing and implementing changes, whether that be in art, digital product design, digital media, software, electronic or data-driven engines, and much more besides. They are the people that build the web products as well as the mobile developments, and they drive the discovery of niche developments that emerge at the instances of different technologies and fields. If we take, for example, mixed reality, audio-visual composition, experience technologies, holography, AI, and even robotics, and at the heart of that is computational intelligence, artificial intelligence, creative coding, and actually or artistic practice. Right. In this session, we outline why De Montfort University's technologies are at the heart of Leicester's innovation, not just creative industries, but also manufacturing, transport, culture, services, and much more besides. The potential for creative technologies as producer services supporting niche innovation in other sectors is immense, and the way in which this can benefit the local economy is immense. And I just want to very quickly think about 4 clear ways in which creative technologies can support Leicester's wider innovation. First one relates to skill barriers. Second one relates to knowledge exchange, and then also levelling up and new types of businesses. For me, thinking about skill barriers, for me, creative technologies seems a world away from my skill sets. I'm based in the business school and I simply lack the ability to code. I cannot make a robot, and I lack even the most basic of engineering and mathematical skills. Unlike space and health, however, I can see the potential of application of creative technologies to existing areas of manufacturing, whether that is about the designing of new products, improved manufacturing processes, next generational, transport, etc. I also see applications in service areas, enhancing experiences through visual and other sensory applications, and in the hardcore thinking and diagnostics are some leading areas of work in our economy. In these different areas in which there are very real skill barriers, I think, knowledge exchange through consultancy, through seconded personnel, through graduate schemes can provide an accessible and affordable way into commercialisation of cutting edge knowledge in a way that patented products may not be able to. We find that De Montfort University's Institute of Artificial Intelligence, its Institute of Creative Technologies, Cyber Technology Institute, for example, have a wealth of personalised skills that could be brought to bear on almost any area of Leicester's manufacturing and services. And that in itself can permit innovation, whether that be of an incremental or radical nature. In that sense, I'm talking about the application of creative technologies to an existing area of work or established business as a producer services. Creative technologies input alongside other professional services such as accounting, legal services, or digital media specialists, or rather they should do in the future. And I do believe that Leicester's businesses would do really well to reach out to the creative technologies to enhance and disrupt their work, to collaborate on new areas of business that extend well beyond the digitisation of products, e-commerce and social media. We're talking about very exciting developments of new products and services. And in the context of levelling up, as well as the post-COVID and post-Brexit economic recovery, a 5 or 10% growth in Leicester's economy would elevate its economy to one of the most leading bits of the economy nationally. It can be easy to feel that Leicester's businesses have been left behind. We've not received the same level of R&D investment, for example. But manufacturing is the jewel in our crown in many respects. It directly accounts for 9% of the UK's wealth, and in our local area accounts for around 60,000 jobs. And I want to really leave you with 4 facts that will try and sell creative technologies to the wider economy. Consider this: economic development hardly ever occurs without industrial sectors. So the idea that we can have creative transformation actually requires industrial sectors to collaborate with. Second, manufacturing drives productivity growth, which is the lifeblood of technological development. Productivity growth in other sectors of the economy are a result first of innovations that take place in manufacturing. And where creative technologies can collaborate with manufacturing, the impact on the economy and other sectors comes much more quickly. Fourth, the manufacturing sector is larger than you think. As I've said, it currently employs 60,000 people in Leicestershire, a little short of 4,000 businesses. But when other subsectors are included, it may be as big as 80,000 jobs. And that's really important because actually healthy manufacturing drives the economy, it drives services. And what I'm arguing is, if we think very carefully about creative technology application to sectors like manufacturing, we will be able to innovate at a much quicker rate in the economy. There are also issues around new models of business, but I don't want to take up too much of your time now. I want to get on to the two professors here that are experts in creative technologies and to find out exactly where the applications can take place. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that, Rachel. I think there's some really interesting questions there about skills barriers and creative technologies, and especially maybe people feeling a bit frightened by new technologies and how they might be able to implement those. I see that comment from Sandra about manufacturing, and I think that it's forgotten as the UK develops, but it is a cornerstone of the British economy. Talking about how we marry kind of grassroots approaches with technological innovation, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Professor Tracy Harwood from the Institute of Creative Technologies, who has done dozens of projects, both here in Leicester and internationally, and is going to talk us through some of the applications of creative technologies that she's used in her career.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Alan. And thanks, Rachel. Actually, that's a really nice introduction to what I'm going to be talking about, which is some of, as Alan just said, some of the examples of applications of creative technologies that I've been working on for 15 odd years, I think, at least, since we created the Institute of Creative Technologies. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Just bear with me a moment. I'm basically going to be exploring some of the applications of creative technologies for industry, primarily drawing on my own practice as a researcher, but fundamentally I'm also a practitioner. I had many years in business before I became an academic. I'm director of the university's usability lab, which I set up 12 odd years ago, and I'm also involved with a number of other activities such as the Art AI Festival, which Alan mentioned in his introduction, which currently is running at various venues across the city at the moment. A user interface is basically the point of interaction you have with something, rendered meaningful through design processes, as Rachel was basically alluding to in her talk. It can be a product or a service, albeit we know their physical properties differ, but the interface doesn't have to be real, and it can simply be an idea made tangible to us through virtual representations. And we engage with some of these things in natural ways through some sort of device, and those devices are becoming kind of ever more sophisticated. So some examples here, which I won't go into a lot of detail about these, but what you can see is that well beyond being able to use our human senses and imagination, the interfaces being designed are significantly changing and extending our understanding of ourselves, our world, and our outlook. We no longer have to sit in front of screens to look at something specific, but we can bring that thing into our own space using visualization techniques, applying advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence to explore its capability before it's even entered the tooling process. And that enables us to use our analytical techniques to theorize about its physicality, about how our customers will interact with it, and so on. Ultimately, these technologies have potential to cut time to market and provide better results through more informed choices through stages of the product development life cycle. So there's a few more. So I tend to synthesize that user interface and the nature of these emerging technologies into these kind of three basic categories. Those that help us to think about our cognitive states and the way that we think, the logic of the process, if you like. Those that help us to think about our cognitive states, our behavior and being in the world, and those that help us to think about our affective states and our emotions. So, for example, AIs connect us to information, VR and AR, virtual reality, augmented reality, inform our behavior, and sensors and wearables, such as some of the examples on here, help us to track, and many of them are now wrapping up with that, our emotional responses. And what's particularly interesting, I think, is that these technologies also help us to ask questions that we could not previously ask or could not previously even hope to answer. So a few examples then of some of the work that I've been doing over the various years, which are far too many to really talk about. Firstly, this one is a retail example. It's quite a few years old now, but the technologies are really only becoming now more mainstream. So what we used here is photogrammetry to map store environments and then place in those store environments virtual products in order to test the saliency of new products. So this is an example of a multi-branded sportswear environment where we were working with Speedo, for example. And what we were looking at is new packaging concepts for some of Speedo's hero brands. And what we were using here is eye tracking technology that illustrates the saliency that target consumers, they were able to pick out some of the key points in the environment of this kind of mocked up virtual store. And that led Speedo to create new packaging, new positioning for packaging on merchandising units, and also to develop new concept stores as well. So there's an example of photogrammetry, for example, which is something that we're only now starting to fully get to grips with. This is another example. This one is an example of psychedelic artwork being used in a therapeutic context. It's actually a highly experimental setting that we developed this for. It's basically a dementia outpatients department, but it's led to a number of new hypotheses about how people can interact with the technology, and is currently being developed along with partners into some grant applications, which are currently in review to explore how the clinical changes that we observed arising from a feasibility study can actually be implemented on a larger scale. Just what are the effects of AI in this kind of context? In fact, this project arose from a piece of artwork that we generated for the second iteration of the Art AI Festival, which is something that really I've used as an experimental forum for engaging people with emerging technologies in a range of different kind of creative ways. So my next slide is another example of a creative application of AI. This is a chatbot which is being used to generate new kinds of interactive tourist trail. Actually, it's in position in Leicester at the moment, where you can interact with the objects of interest. And it's proving quite successful, engaging quite a few folks with each of the points of interest. And it's become part of the city's cultural recovery strategy as a consequence. What's quite fun is that people are asking the chatbot lots of different types of questions about their environment, and I guess learning something new in the process about the cityscape that they're living in. So I think that one's quite an interesting application. We're going to look at doing a little more with that later on as we start to see this particular application come to an end. The next one is some other examples from the same festival, actually, this year's festival, where the artwork is being used to pose questions about how people understand different types of emerging AI-based technologies. So Elvis in that top corner, I'm really hoping this doesn't crash because it did earlier. Elvis in the top corner is an example of a deep fake. And what's kind of interesting about it is that it's generated over 7,000 responses in the 6 weeks that it's been running. Most of those are actually highly negative, and I would go as far as to say they're trolling comments. But mainly the comments are to do with "that's not Elvis," I don't like that because it isn't him. And the point really is that people are actually considering what the deep fake is doing, and clearly they don't like it, but that's, you know, their prerogative. Point is they're taking the time to think about it. So I'm actually quite pleased that we're getting that level of response from it. Now, the one in the middle that's on a bit of a loop, that was our test setup for Master Reality, which I'm really pleased Alan said he's been and interacted with. It went live on Saturday, I think it was. Master Reality is using facial mapping technology, and what we're playing with here is the way in which you can kind of play with your identity using that kind of facial recognition software. It's not actually storing any data, it's just capturing things in the moment, and that's got kind of interesting implications for the way that we might use facial recognition technology, although not well thought through from an industry perspective at the moment. So the Art AI Festival is all about pushing the boundaries of these kinds of applications. The other one that I want to mention briefly is the top left, and this is a new type of robotic interface. It's not a video clip, it's just an image. But basically what this one is doing is capturing and sensing lots of information in the moment and using that information to generate an emotive, mainly non-verbal response. And the project here, which I'm part of this project, it's coming out of Kyoto and also Croatia, is that what we're training this for, or what we're looking at how this is going to be applied for, is in the future it will become integrated into robot care settings. So we're exploring people's reaction to this kind of level of what we call biomimicry. So that's doing something quite interesting. Now the one on the bottom left is doing something different again. That's where you interact with it by pushing the pixels around in order to generate new patterns. And actually when it goes live, which won't be for another few weeks, that one will be activated through sound. So we've got some quite interesting ways that you can engage. Lots of these are using different types of engagement strategy. So we're trying to push the boundaries a little bit in an arts and cultural context here. And then working with another business using a range of different creative technologies interventions. This is actually a knowledge transfer partnership project, which basically led us to yes, implement a load of product and service developments through the application of creative technologies, but ultimately what it has resulted in is a new business model. So what we have here is a business model that reflects how creative technologies have become a core part of the business activity. And as I said, this was funded by the KTP scheme. I think Cameron's in the virtual room here as well, and I'm sure if we want to get that far, then we can happily talk about the KTP process with colleagues. But these are great fun projects to work on because you can explore new applications and think about them in new ways without risking necessarily the business as usual stuff that you engage with. And I like working on these kinds of projects as a consequence. And finally, this is another little project that I worked on with through the usability lab. And here what we're actually exploring is product development. So obviously a brand that you know pretty well was the client here. And what we were trying to explore were the types of features that customers value when we talk about sustainability. And by that, I mean, what are the green credentials that you can bring through a product as you present it to market, basically. So we were exploring those features and the order of those features and how they are communicated at the point of sale, and not only the quality of the product, the physical phone itself, if you like, but also the packaging in which it goes and how that communicates with your target customers. And here what you've got, or what you're looking at, is basically a mock-up, but we mocked this up in a physical space and we tested this with actual customers, again using tracking technologies. So these are quite relevant applications, I suppose, of creative technologies that you can use in lots of different ways. But fundamentally, I'm all about a methodology in the application of these, and this basically is the methodology that I use. So it's an approach that I use across a range of different projects, and it fundamentally takes an emerging technology concept, processes it through a design and visualization phase in order to test it within a market context. And I work across all three of those areas with the relevant expertise, because I'm not a designer, I'm not really a technology specialist, but I'm a kind of a business specialist, I suppose. So I kind of think about how we go about doing that in a very specific way. So that's it for me, really. Just so that you don't think I make it up, here's a few research publications that reflect some of the work that I'm doing, have been doing, and the way in which I kind of push the boundaries, and very happy to talk about anything in particular, should you so wish. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tracy. And I think the common thread really between the four of us, in fact, is our willingness to work directly with business. But before we move on, I do actually have a video case study of that KTP, Tracy, that I'm just going to show. So I'll share my screen so that you people can get a better idea of what happened on the Serendipity KTP. If I... Where are we? Yes, we are here.
Hello, my name is Paulette Brooks, and I'm the CEO and Artistic Director of Serendipity. Serendipity is heritage, arts and education. The work that we tend to do, we have 2 festivals a year, LDIF, which is Let's Dance International Frontiers, and BHM Black History Month. LDIF is seen as the flagship. It's the one that has the international flavour and the one which allows us to bring in artists from all over the world. What that does, it concentrates on Black dance. Alongside that, what I wanted us to have was a living archive. And we've been able to do with that, have an archive that's open 2 to 4 every day, but also it's a digital archive so people can access it from different points. There's no one else doing this sort of work. So in terms of a niche, I think we're not only niche in the UK, but also internationally.
My name is Tracy Harwood. I'm Professor of Digital Culture at De Montfort University. I work in the Institute of Creative Technologies, which is a research institute that focuses on transdisciplinary research. So a knowledge transfer partnership is a partnership between a business and a university, orchestrated by a relatively recent graduate who is the associate, who acts as a kind of a third leg of a stool. So it's a really interesting partnership between the 3 parties, if you like. The idea is that all parties benefit from having this collaborative relationship. So the business benefits by having some new knowledge embedded into the business through the associate, and that associate is supported by the academic need in the cases that we're talking about here. And that I benefit from understanding more about what the business does, and that the associate benefits by developing themselves. It's a great opportunity for an associate to cross a number of boundaries that they wouldn't normally access.
My name is Sam Warren, and I worked for Serendipity as a KTP associate. My role within Serendipity was to create new sources of income using technology. So, for instance, Serendipity as an organisation runs festivals and promotes diversity in the arts within the Midlands and also the UK. And it was my role to digitise certain products such as books, certain e-learning opportunities, and create a digital membership that could centre around all the festivals that they do.
The KTP, I'm working with Tracy Harwood and Sam Warren, was a really, really exciting project for us. When we first met Tracy and then started to look at writing the application, what was unique for us, it was taking an arts organisation which is coming from the subsidised sector and thinking about it in a commercial way and trying to find that fit where technology, arts and culture and business came together. Was an interesting concept for us as a very small charity.
What we wanted to achieve here was a more sustainable business commercial led programme of activities that Serendipity could build into its business plan, if you like, so that it was less reliant on grant funding?
When I started at Serendipity, there were a certain amount of products we sold, and then during the process of the KTP, we were able to expand into different areas, different markets using digital technologies. The KTP associate position allowed me to make lots more contacts and also kind of broaden my CV and also my skill set. From my experience, I definitely recommend taking part as a KTP associate. It's something that allows you to combine both your passions with business.
It's been really good for us because it's allowed us to push some boundaries. I would definitely recommend being involved in a project such as the KTP. It allows you to focus down on your project from a business perspective. It allows you to drill down on a particular area that you want to expand, develop, explore. And from that point of view, you don't always have that time when you're running the day-to-day business. And therefore, if you can have somebody who can sit alongside you and work with you to navigate new waters, that's a really, really good thing.
I would definitely recommend a KTP. It's fun, it's challenging, but particularly it's great to see somebody succeed by taking an interpretation of what you know and making it their own and running with it. So from all parties' points of view, yes, I would definitely recommend doing a KTP.
Brilliant. So hopefully you've got a better idea of KTPs and what they are if you didn't before.
What is Qualified Home? Qualified Home brings together remote invigilation.
Thanks, YouTube. Surprisingly, for small to medium enterprises, the KTP is largely funded by organisations and the university. So if you are an SME and you want to get involved in the KTP, it's worth inquiring about what new knowledge it could generate for your business. So going from the creative side of creative tech through to some really cool applications of creative technologies, we've got Professor Daniela Romano, who's going to talk to us a little bit about creative AI and its applications for health and well-being. Daniela.
I am Daniela Romano. I'm a professor in the Institute for AI, and I've prepared, rather than a presentation, as you've seen a few, some video. So I would like to share my screen, and I will talk you through some of the applications that we've done that include both AI and virtual reality or creative technology. So one of the projects is, for example, the virtual oviduct, in which we have, which is this one, in which we have started from histology slides, and we have created the shape of a virtual oviduct of a mouse. And at the same time, we have launched these points, are agents, so intelligent agents that are able to behave and navigate inside the oviduct to study how fertilization takes place in situ. So we study the angle at which they need to move in order to reach the eggs, which are these pink balls. And this is based on real morphology that was scanned from histology slide, and includes both the creative technology, so virtual reality can be seen both in VR or 2D or whatever you want to see it from different direction, and intelligent agent that behave inside it. Continuing on the health and health application. So we've done something for early detection of schizophrenia. I will not go in many detail, but I'll show you, for example, this application. We were looking at whether it's possible to build an interface that allows people in wheelchair to move the wheelchair utilizing a EEG. Now there are solutions in this is particularly useful for people that cannot use their arm and their legs, and therefore they can only use the power of their brain in order to provide commands to a computer, therefore an interface. And so we made an example of navigation that can be done through this color-based interface, and you can see there is a game in there. This is myself with the EEG on. This application requires no training, because training is one of the problems connected with the encephalogram. And by looking at the flickering color, I'm able to move that ball. So you can imagine that we've applied it into games, but basically there is a machine learning algorithm that detects what I'm looking at and immediately transform this into a command on a 2D surface. So as you can see, I'm able to move the ball. There is a slightly delay until the program assess exactly what I'm looking at, but it is quite acceptable, and I'm able to complete the game. So we use a game as an application. And then I will go into an application of, again, virtual reality and AI. So this is a real project that has been done with architect and planner and Sheffield City Council. And basically, we have on the left-hand side some parameters which are related to the construction of this weir. And at the same time, there is an intelligent assessment of the quality of the design, which happen at the same time as the design is being done. And this is and allows you to say whether the weir is well designed, in this case is green, or is changing the parameter. We can change the type of design. And for example, this is a stepped weir, and you can see that it's been assessed as red because it breaks some of the parameter that assess automatically the quality of the water that it will be used in there. So we can do this apply to architecture, for example, as well, in which we combine both the 3D representation and the intelligent system behind that helps the design. I will stop this here and I will move to a very recent project that has been done so December 2020 was finished. And in here we have considered health and safety. And basically we are able to model, given a building in which there are different hazards. These are the construction workers that are working on the site, and we are able to identify when people moving around in the building might come near an hazard. So for example, you can see here they become red when they are too close to the steps, and the steps are they don't have a banister, and therefore it requires an hazard. Now, why do we need this? Because it allows us automatically to scan a surface of a building in construction and see whether there is any possible danger. For example, here there is overcrowding, so several people become red. And this is just some of the application that I've done. I've got many other videos. I just wanted to give you a selection. And so what I'm interested into is to try to study the human and how we can help and support them with our technology, utilizing both the creative technology, so VR, games, anything with the 3D representation, media, but also artificial intelligence. So a lot of these underline, again, even in this health and safety, the people are agents, so they are intelligent agents. And so this allows us to use both to mix and match all the different skills and create something which is unique. And some of these projects, so the last two projects that I showed, the VR assessment and the health and safety, are actually in being produced for and with a company. In this case, this was with Costain. In this case was with several people, including Sheffield City Council when I was there. I'll show just that video. This is just a video that we've prepared together with the presentation of a paper that we have submitted. And it is just at early stage, but I will play it. So basically what we've looked at mind wandering. So the point in which people sort of detach themselves from the real world and their mind wanders into different thought. This is it's something that is done quite a lot, but like everybody can do it. But in particular, people with schizophrenia tend to mind wander more than the average person. So as you know, schizophrenia impairs people's rights, is based on both the family history, but also event that might have happened in their mind. So we looked whether mind wandering could be a way of detecting early onset of schizophrenia, and this is more interesting, especially if it's done, for example, to young population before 18, because they might be considered a trade marker for people before 18. As you might know or not, schizophrenia is something that usually manifests. It is possible to diagnose it earlier, but usually manifests itself around the age of 18 onwards. So that's when there could be a trigger that allow people to have the first attack. And the most important thing is to have this early detection, because with every new incident, it is more difficult to resolve it, right? So the earlier you can detect that that's a schizophrenia incident, the better it is for the diagnosis. And so we build a virtual reality world in which we have assessed whether people tend to mind wander more than healthy control. And this has been done with utilizing virtual reality and EEG for the frontal lobe. And yeah, this is a paper. So I will not go explain any further, but this is something that we have tested. I just want to demonstrate, and there is a difference that we have found, and therefore we believe that this could be a way of detecting schizophrenia. Okay. So of course, this is pure research now, but you can see how combining, in this case is pure virtual reality. There is no AI, but you could embed the AI, because you could show that, and then you could make an adaptive similar project, for example, in game addiction. Again, we've tried to detect whether excessive gamer, so those that work more than 20 hours, can be detected while they're playing, and whether there could be some intervention, like for other addiction. For example, in slot machine, they give a message. So we're trying to see whether it's possible to detect this point of saying you are playing too much, but it's not just about that, it's going beyond, and this will cause harm to your health, and then the kind of messages. And this is a project that on which I'm working with, also with psychology, for example. Or we have another one on health disorder. We have many, so I'll just give you some of the video.
I was just thinking you probably don't want to gamify an approach to game addiction in some of the previous examples, but that was fantastic, Daniela. I thought it was very appropriate to kick off with Sandra's question, because I'm sure we all have different experiences of this, of what the challenges are when academia works with businesses, and how do you creatively overcome them? Now, from personal experience, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a challenge, but for me, I find that businesses don't know what their knowledge generation potential is. So I often come across projects and I think, wow, this would be a really interesting piece of new knowledge that lots of people could benefit from. And they often don't see the potential that it could have. But I don't know if any of you have any experiences that you want to share.
I can share a few if you like. I mean, the key thing for me, having worked with a number of businesses over the years, which probably Daniela's got the same kind of experience, you know, obviously as a researcher, you know a lot more about what's coming down the road and what the potentials of it are. And businesses are working very much in the moment. You know, they have to feed their employees basically, and so it's quite hard sometimes to actually persuade people to look a little bit further down the line, in order to reflect on even just 2 or 3 years away, as to what might actually be going to impact on their business. But I would say all of the businesses that I've worked with over the years have had long-term forward-thinking strategies, and some of the SMEs in particular have had a slightly different attitude to quite a few of the others, which fundamentally is that they are open to new ideas because they know that they're struggling. You know, they know that they've only got a fairly short-term window in terms of what they're actually doing. So that's one of the key things, getting people to think far enough ahead, given that, you know, for a grant application process to go through, say for a KTP, you're looking potentially at a year before you can actually start doing it. You're looking at another year to deliver it, and then you're looking at a period of reflection in order to implement it and integrate it. So, for example, when I worked on the KTP that, you know, I was the project manager for the build of Phoenix, for example. The idea behind, you know, Phoenix was a £23 million build. I was actually on the physical build phase, but I immediately knew that when Phoenix was going to be actually opened as a building, we were going to be in a recession state. We put a KTP in place, and that KTP was about transformation of the business through new kinds of skills that it needed at that point in time. It was basically a cinema, an independent cinema, and we needed to turn it into a digital hub for the city. That was the goal there, and that KTP allowed us to deliver that project. But it was another year after the KTP had completed that it actually got national portfolio status. So it's a really long, you know, window that you're kind of looking at. You really need to be mindful that when you're working with academia and researchers, you are looking at those kinds of timescales. So not only are the texts down the road, but also the time to work with us is also a challenge, I think.
Yeah, and sometimes we're bound by the academic calendar as well.
Well, product development life cycles, I would say, is what we're fundamentally about.
Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying there. I think for me, because I'm not so closely entrenched in the technology aspect, I think there's a couple of things for me. One is the time frame, which is worth revisiting, and I think Sandra's alluding to it in the chat. Well, you know, that time frame may be a little off, to put it politely, but I think there's also a language barrier. I think that the technologists are passionate about their work, so are businesses, but sometimes there can be a bit of a gap in between. So I think the issue is, I think because Tracy's saying there's a long lead-in time, I think that's accurate in general. I think the issue is much more about general level creative problem solving, because I think the businesses can't necessarily see how the new things coming down the pipeline might help them, and the time frame might be a bit of a disadvantage. So I think it's much more like the solution to this is about having dialogue, and the dialogue with, for example, the institutes at De Montfort University, you know, a sort of permanent sort of dialogue, so that when those companies are ready, they can start talking through problems, and academics can try and solve that through a creative process. And so that it's not just a one-time occurrence. They're not just coming to solve a particular problem. It's more like an evolutionary sort of dialogue, if that makes sense, that they may be doing work with, you know, these technologies time and time again.
Sorry, I was on music, Daniela. Sorry, do you have any thoughts?
Yes. So you know, for the audience, I would like to share that it is possible to have a much smaller engagement. For example, I've been quite successful in obtaining some Innovate UK grants, and as you know, you have about a month usually from publication to when you have to submit to put together a bid, and I've been successful in quite a few of those, working with businesses that have approached me, as Rachel has said, for a creative problem solving. So the best strategy, if I may suggest, is that if you like what you've seen, you contact us, and perhaps you discuss with us your business and your problems, or not problem, or needs. You can call it needs or a vision. Sometimes a business has a vision to move in a direction, and because we are at the forefront of the knowledge, because this is our job, right? So our job is to know what will happen in the next 3 to 5 years as a researcher. Then we are able to advise on what is coming next and what could be strategically very important for you to know and to be first in. Right. And this is when then we say, right, so this is what we can help you with. You can get a competitive edge by bringing in some of these technology or some of this idea or some of the research, and basically perhaps become more innovative, because at the end of the day, your work is to make money out of these changes or innovation in the way that your product or in the way that you do things.
Fantastic. So everyone, please do post questions and comments for us. Otherwise, I am going to pose my questions that I was frantically scribbling down as you were all speaking. It was so interesting. Now, Rachel, you did a lot of work on the LEP identifying the skills gap. In terms of new technologies, where should businesses be looking if they want to innovate?
I'm not sure you even understand the question, Alan. That's a really hard one.
It's kind of a tough area. So when you did your work in investigating the LEP, were there certain skills gaps that you found kind of in terms of digital skills in the Leicester area? Where do you think people should be investing their efforts?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that are very pertinent to the discussion this afternoon. The first one, obviously, is immediate skill gaps. Now, quite strangely, COVID has had quite an unusual impact on our local economy. So there are some aspects of, the obvious point is that there are some aspects of cultural industries and creative industries that have been absolutely devastated by COVID-19. I don't think any of us will be surprised by that. But there are some other aspects, some other areas of digital media, for example, that just have too much work. They can't cope with it. They're coming back and saying the demand is bigger than it has ever been. And I think that's a reflection of the importance of creative technology, the awareness of that creative technology input into business success. And I think it is true to say people are saying they just can't recruit enough people. So that's the most obvious area, that we need more people learning about creative technologies to fulfill not just our local demand, but all sorts of demand across the country. I think the second point is we might look at the local economy and think, well, there's a bit of a mismatch here. We've got maybe 60,000 people in manufacturing, directly employed in manufacturing, 80,000 odd in manufacturing in its broadest sense, and probably, I think it's been estimated, 127,000 in highly vulnerable sectors. So we know that there's a need to change. And you might think, well, how is somebody in manufacturing going to be able to make use of space, as we were talking yesterday, or even creative technologies that we're talking about today? And I think what we're probably needing is quite a large labour market reskilling. Now that sounds quite negative, but it's not, because there are a number of companies out there that have already been talking to universities and to manufacturing sector to say some of those core skills that are germane to manufacturing and transport and engineering have incredible application to be swiveled around and used into creative technologies, particularly where they're looking at blockchain or things like that. So I think we increasingly need to think not so much about the skills gap, but about how we can use the skills that we've got and slightly pivot them so that they're addressing local needs. And we actually call that smart strategizing. So it's just using what we've got a lot more smartly and using it for creative technologies, I think.
I love that phrase, smart strategizing. I'm going to steal that and write it as a book. So Rob has just asked a question about if I was a manufacturing company and I was considering investment in capital equipment or a digital process, how could I test that? Now, related to that, I wanted to pose both to Tracy and to Daniela about using the university as a research and development environment. So what are your thoughts on how that can happen so that there's not so much of a risk for businesses in those circumstances?
Sorry, I mute because, okay. Okay, I'll go first. I'll be just sharing my thought, and basically the university is an incubator. There are both funding available to us, but also funding available from the government to stimulate the application of research into the real world. So we are very keen to make an impact. So we don't create just for the sake of creating, but we want to create for an application that has that is for society or for the whole UK. Now, why a business should come to us, I think, is because we can de-risk the adventure, let's say. So if you come to a problem and say, I wonder how could I do X, then we can try it into research and development setting and make a business case and do a market validation. For example, recently I've been involved in a competition where the outcome was to create a spin-out company. We are still in the process of going forward with this competition, and so there are ways to create both new branches of your own company that might be a more creative or AI side, but also you can benefit, for example, from the student project or from a PhD or from work that is being done with, let's be honest, low cost. Yeah. Sometime in zero cost if you are willing to bear with us with a student, a master student, for example. So there are many ways to engage with us that certainly can help you minimize also the risk of taking the approach.
Yeah, and I will add to that fundamentally the area that I've worked in over the years is bringing, I mean, I see this as a definite trajectory with the application of some of the technologies that we've been talking about, and there are now an increasing number of platforms that facilitate that, which is this link between blue sky creativity to more design thinking through a process of visualization, and then increasingly applying simulation techniques to understand innovation, as I said before, you get to a tooling phase. So in a manufacturing context, that's what we kind of tend to talk about. And you know, you can dip into our expertise at any point along those processes, you know, along that kind of pipeline from you know, but you're calling on many different types of expertise. You know, creativity sits across a range of different schools of disciplines, schools, labs that we have in the university. Visualization tips across many different labs that we have access to, and simulation does as well. So you know, it's really, I would go to a business development manager at the university and say ask what the general you know, talk about what the general problem is, if you like, and they will bring together a team that can assist across that that process, if you like. In terms of future trajectory, you know, and skill sets, just to add to some of the points being made, one of the key areas of application is that of digital twinning. And that's why this trajectory is so important, this link between creativity, visualization, simulation, because all of that is what is now tipping into smart strategizing, basically. And they are skills that are much in demand. and they come out of game-based technologies, basically. But a lot of the students even that we have are not even seeing the game-based technologies that they are working with as their future career path in anything other than game, because this is such a rapidly moving environment. So they come in because they think they want to go out as indie game developers. They'll go out not as indie game developers, but as application developers for hard industry. And we're already seeing, you know, some of our students, for example, have gone out to work in organizations such as BMW, Jaguar and what have you, and it's because those technologies are being applied in that environment. And they've been out in those environments for 4 or 5 years. But it's only now that we're seeing other industries catch up with that.
Brilliant. Yeah, in fact, I made a note about gamification and serious gaming, and Daniela, you've used elements of that in your work. And I was just thinking, when you were going through your examples about positive psychology and positive reinforcement through gamification and how that's helped people. So even when I was watching the eye movement stuff, I was thinking, you feel like you've achieved something even though it's a natural response. So yeah, I was thinking maybe you could say something more about gamification and that kind of positive reinforcement for health and well-being.
Yes, this concept of gamification is applying what we have learned from the games into the real world. So the most important feature of game is eye engagement. Okay, so people get drawn, so people that create game design with engagement in mind. And they are very successful. As you know, we are the leading country, especially in Europe, with regards to game creation. So we are leading in the creative technology sectors, both in music, as everybody knows, but also in games. And this is, so we are the, you know, the best at these things. So gamification utilizes the feature of games in order to engage people in tasks which are not games. So for example, you might have seen my schizophrenia video utilize a simple character like sort of baby Shivan to engage people into the content which is a bit heavy. Right? So then we use a gamified approach, which is a visual aspect of games, in order to talk about something which is a bit difficult. And that's just an example. But there are many other examples, and a lot of the very successful apps and software utilize gamification at the base of their design. So this is a strategy that is utilized to engage. Another example is the idea of maintaining a constant flow of emotion coming from the user that allows people to be wanting to continue, right? So they stimulate your emotion, they stimulate your response, and to keep you in a state of flow that will allow you to continue utilizing the app or whatever that is. And this has a very good benefit, for example, in health, because we want people to do their therapy, and gamification is utilizing. One of my PhD students, for example, is working on aphasia, so people that have got a stroke and they need to do speech, they need to do several exercise every day. So we're utilizing gamification in order to engage them into the therapy. And so this can be very, very powerful. So I don't know if I explained it well.
It's brilliant. Fantastic. In fact, what struck me about both yours and Tracy's presentation is the idea of, and Tracy, you mentioned this directly, affect, you know, affect, the emotive experience of it. And it's kind of like people might think of technologies as quite cold, but both of your presentations centered on human experience and human relationships with tech. So I guess I'm interested in, you know, that relationship between the human and the technology in your work. How important is affect in what you do?
It's fundamental, isn't it? I mean, as Daniela just alluded to there, it's, you know, you need to, a lot of the texts that I'm talking about are fundamentally about sensing it, and then you have to think about how you utilize that in developing what the application is. And you know, some of the examples that I talked about really are playing with emotion. So for example, that robot head, we're talking about biomimicry there, and that is fundamentally about drawing out different emotional responses and then leading people to emotionally engage with something through that kind of process. And you know, in its care setting, when it's fully developed, the idea is that you will, I suppose, I'm loath to use these kind of language, but fundamentally you're talking about pacifying people in a particular context, or engaging people in a particular way so that they're more settled, less distressed, happier in their environment, that kind of thing, which is probably not the best application of it, but that's the kind of application that it'll probably be used for. So affect is kind of fundamental, really. And you can track it in a number of different ways. I mean, I've tracked it through pupil idolation, through galvanic skin response, in gaming texts, and all sorts of different methods really that you can use. You can also use body position as well to track people and track the way that they're engaging with things. So there's a number of ways you can do it, and a number of ways that you can use it. But as I said, I kind of work with the cognitive, affective levels in order to figure out what it is we're trying to track and use in the applications.
Fantastic, great. I wanted to ask about thinking more about grassroots applications of creative technologies. So if I were a small to medium business in Leicester, what would you recommend I implemented in my business immediately in terms of creative tech?
Hello?
Yeah, can I answer that first? I would say don't do it unless you know why you're doing it. Because, you know, tech at the end of the day costs a lot of money, costs a lot of energy in implementing it, but you have to know why it is you're doing it. And if it's not part of your business strategy, then don't do it. I mean, a lot of the businesses that I have worked with have a very clear vision of where they're going and why it will be important to them. But other than that, work it out.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point to consider, that kind of innovation for innovation's sake, rather than innovation for the sake of progress. So that's quite a fine line there. Daniela, I don't know if you were a small to medium enterprise in Leicester, what would be your most immediate implementation of creative tech?
I don't know, I was also reading the chat, and I think, yes, digital twin, for example, is something that allows us to immediately resolve a phenomenon or study a phenomenon and see where it works. So if I may think about the most easy things, is like everybody understands, is a car. Right, so if you are able to simulate the car, and this is actually used in reality. When you go for to your dealer, they use a simulator that takes all the data from your car, put it inside this program that simulates how the car works, and tell you which part of the car is actually faulty. And then they say you need to change such and such. So this is an application that we use every day. Nobody actually questioned that. And what basically it is a digital twin is a pure simulation-based environment that collects the data from the real-world phenomena, simulates it to do a diagnostic. So we can do this for all sorts of projects, and the representation can be not only software-based, but also visual, because depending on the application, it might be necessary to do a visual representation of it. I can give you an example in health. We simulated, for example, how different bacteria move in an organism. Okay, so maybe it's less evident as the car, but then you can say, if I put this drug in, what will happen? And so that you can simulate in silico, so it's called, what happened with the intervention that you intend to make. And this will save you a lot of money, because you can actually try things out before you actually spend the time and money to implement it. So I think digital twin is the most immediate application. And there are a lot of digital twin we already utilize, yeah?
Fantastic, great. Tracy, I also wanted to ask very briefly on indirect kind of applications of this, of how to uplift business. So when you do things in high cross, for example, that increases footfall or engagement. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the kind of indirect use of creative technology to support business. So in that sense, reinvigorating the high street, something like that.
Well, yes, okay. So the part of the thinking behind the Art AI Festival is how we help the environment to recover a little bit. So we're using, I suppose we're doing a meanwhile application of a store environment, basically. So I've got, I don't know, 4 or 5 stores that I'm, putting installations in, and it helps just enliven the space, really, in order to continue to support footfall. And I've worked with both shopping centres on this. I've also worked with the city council and various other stakeholders in the city, and it's really just about helping the streets not look quite so dead. And the city council, working with the university, has actually got other projects that it's working on to do very similar things. I think the challenge is really to get them to move from a meanwhile application to some kind of more permanent application. I think one of the greatest challenges that I've seen unfold over the last few years, bearing in mind we started a retail lab about, 12 years ago, with a view to helping the retail environment think about some of the issues that were coming very rapidly down the road, most of which were not recognised at the point that we developed that lab. Mary Portas had only just kicked off with some of her discussion and what have you. But the key challenge that this sector faced at the time was this move from very long-term contracts to now very short-term contracts. So back then we were talking about 10-year contracts for retail stores. Now we're talking anything between 1 and 3 month contracts. And when you're working at that kind of level, your turnover is really high. And then what do you put in those stores as you're waiting for the next client to come through? It's really hard. It's a really tough environment to be in at the moment. And that's, of course, why you're seeing retail look at other kinds of opportunities where the contracts might be slightly longer. So you've now got that golf course in High Cross, for example. You've got quite an emphasis on food, but I think you also have to look at how you get culture out of the cultural quarter into that mixed environment in order to sustain footfall across the whole cityscape. And I don't think cities have done that very well over the years. I think segregating stuff off out into quarters isn't helpful, given some of the issues that are only going to continue to get worse, frankly.
Fantastic. I thought I'd close just by asking everyone what they thought the future of higher education working with businesses, particularly in Leicester, and ways in which you see the higher education institution supporting both the business and the wider community. So what do you think, how do you think that will evolve over the next 5 years? Daniela, you're on mute again.
Sorry, I mute always in between. Yes, I think that, well, one of the biggest things that is happening and under your eye is big data, right? So we have big data, artificial intelligence is one of the promising technology that is changing the way we do things. So just think about the face recognition app that's been going around even for COVID and, spotting various things. So I'm probably biased, but I think that AI is becoming something that is in everything that we do. But also because we are very visual people and we understand images much more than we understand data, the visual representation of this data or a visual representation of a phenomenon is key for to aid our understanding. So some of the work that I'm trying to do is actually to see how can we give information in a visual form. For example, with self-driving cars, if the car wants to alert the driver, how can we do it on the screen without distracting, without ruin, making the person crash or something. So I think the combination of creativity and think about it in a different way with the power of the data is the future.
Great, Tracy.
Yeah, I think given that something like 70% of businesses don't have access to R&D within their business environment or don't engage with it, I think the role of universities as a civic platform for R&D activities is actually pretty fundamental. And I think there is a need for the business support services within the city, some of whom I think are on this call today, should help us engage more as an R&D platform for local businesses. I would definitely put that plea out to you guys to do that.
Fantastic, yeah, and also it's easier than you think. I think sometimes people might think engaging with a higher education institution means a lot of red tape. Not the case. You know, we're always welcoming of new enterprise opportunities and seeing what we can do to contribute both to the business and the wider communities. That was an amazing discussion. I really enjoyed everything that everybody had to say.